Hi, this is Stephanie, and welcome to the Evergreen Systems presentation of Service Catalog versus Request Portal, the 6 characteristics that set them apart. Just a reminder that all participants are muted for the duration of the event. This is a live event and we are taking questions, so please use the Q&A panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. It may also be accessed by the green WebEx toolbar at the top of your window if you are in full screen mode. If you have questions or issues with the WebEx functionality during the event, please email marketing@evergreensys.com. The Q&A panel is for questions for our panelists only. Today we will begin with Don Casson, CEO of Evergreen Systems, and I'm going to turn it over to Don now. Go ahead, Don.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. As Stephanie said, I'm Don Casson, CEO of Evergreen. With me today are Phil Hellerman, a principal consultant at Evergreen with a tremendous idle depth, and Jeff Benedict, who heads up Evergreen's ITSM practice and is a phenomenal solutions architect to boot. Here's our agenda today. Over the past year, we've run about 40 Service Catalog workshops across the U.S., and one of the most common questions we are asked is, what is the difference between a Service Catalog and a request portal? Our primary goal today is to explain a handful of key differences and give you a few key takeaways you can use in your planning and activities now. Beyond that, we will briefly demonstrate a very advanced user-centric Service Catalog we have developed on the ServiceNow platform. Then we will open the line for questions if you have any. At any time during the webinar, you may submit a question using the Q&A function, as Stephanie said. Let me tell you briefly about Evergreen Systems. Evergreen is a US-based consulting firm, and we've worked with hundreds of mid-market and Fortune 1000 companies over almost the past 20 years to improve their IT service management execution. We are a full lifecycle consulting firm, or as one customer put it, you have both process and technology in one company. We are also one of the leading ServiceNow partners and have over a decade of domain experience in each area of the ServiceNow portfolio. I hope you don't mind me saying, so what? For the most part, ITSM has been done the same old way for the past decade. Incident, problem, change, and little knowledge. At the end of it, while we may be running a little better, so what? What about the customer? For the past 2 years at Evergreen, we have been working very hard to change this and focus from the customer in, not from IT out. Our inspirations have been Apple, Amazon, and Google, to name a couple. We see both IT and the customer's experience evolving hand in hand, not as an afterthought. And if you look at this diagram here, on the left-hand side, IT is maturing, going from silos of IT activities to then delivering IT services, and then finally to being the engine behind delivery of any services. On the right-hand side, the customer experience is evolving from what I call not very good to being able to access a thoughtful and complete portfolio of IT services to being empowered ultimately by a true digital workspace which drives their productivity and creativity. That's what we're working on at Evergreen. Let me now turn this over to Phil Hellerman, please.
Thank you, Don, and thanks for everyone joining with us today, taking time out from your busy schedules. Today I want to talk about why the Service Catalog is not a request portal. As Don mentioned, many of the more than 400 attendees at our one-day Service Catalog workshops around the U.S. asked the same question: what's the difference? Well, the Service Catalog really should identify services that are based upon what the business wants and giving the business customer the power to solve problems. On the other hand, the request portal is typically a singular, simplified, tactical, and transactional tool supporting everyday business needs. So today, let's take a deeper dive into the 6 characteristics that set a Service Catalog apart from a request portal. Next slide. So Probably the most important difference between a service catalog and a request portal is the strategic versus tactical nature of the catalog when we look at it in comparison to the request portal. The service catalog is a strategic tool that is aligned with the business strategy, or at least it should be aligned with the business strategy. We like to say the IT service catalog should empower the employee to perform their jobs better and more productively. The request portal, on the other hand, is typically tactical and transactional. We like to use the term transactional because requests typically involve two parties that have a kind of reciprocal relationship. We also believe that a service within the service catalog can only be defined by combining components defined within the service portfolio. In fact, the service portfolio really is the factory from which the services are developed or manufactured. The service catalog is proactive. Services are defined in the catalog after analysis and identifying such things as the service description, its options, any costs associated with the service, and so on. All services offered should be based upon the strategy of the organization. For example, if the enterprise strategically wants to move away from a SQL database towards an Oracle, it would proactively define the parameters of the Oracle service offering for the catalog. On the other hand, the request portal is highly reactive. It lists the items that answer the question, what do you want to do? For example, I want to have access to the Oracle database. The service portfolio is the source of the components for services defined in the service catalog. As an example, I like to say the service portfolio is like a box of Legos. It contains all the components IT has under management. These components are then put together, that is, aggregated, to form a service identified in the service catalog. Requests are typically singular in nature and not typically combined. However, some organizations combine requests into complex activities. Even so, they still are not services. As an illustration, Evergreen likes to use the example of employee onboarding. The service not only aggregates IT components and capabilities, such as network or storage and access, but it also aggregates cross-functional departments like human resources and facilities and combines them as part of the service. When we look at an example of a request, we see singular transactions. I want to print on a third floor printer, for example, or I want to access the Oracle database, or I want to increase the size of my mailbox. Next slide. The service catalog should present services that are composed of a variety of components defined in the service portfolio, as we said. Component capabilities are typically the responsibility of distinct departments and operationally delivered to the customer by groups based on operational level agreements. Requests are typically delivered by a single department or individual working from a queue or list of requests. The individual views the request, determines the task and activities necessary to accomplish the request, and then executes it. Any service listed in the service catalog includes a variety of details and in-depth information about the service. These details include service options such as storage tiers, mailbox size, iPhone 6 versus Galaxy S5, service hours, response times that are typically found in a service level agreement, and all have been defined and included within the service description. Requests are simply lists of things every employee needs. These are basic requests, such as those everyday activities like access to an environment or being able to use a printer on another floor. When IT shows value for the services it defines and presents to its end user, it engages in cost transparency. Service catalogs support the capability to identify a price, chargeback, or showback for the service to provide insight to the business on service costs. Requests, on the other hand, are rarely associated with a cost and need to be executed actually regardless of the cost. Next slide. Those of you who are familiar with the ITIL framework clearly understand that ITIL differentiates the stages in which the service portfolio, service catalog, and request portal operate. Service portfolio is aligned with the service strategy, and the service catalog aligns with the service design phase, and the request fulfillment aligns with service operations. By realizing that the request portal is part of daily operations while the service catalog is aligned with the business strategy, organizations raise the execution importance of the service catalog higher up into the organization where it becomes aligned, importantly, with the business leadership and financial strategies of the enterprise itself. When we look at service strategy, it really defines how an IT organization defines its service that empower business customers to achieve the desired business outcomes in line with the business strategy. The service design stage creates service solutions that meet everyday changing business requirements. It does so by defining that service and requisite processes, policies, and governance that facilitate the introduction of new or modified services to the catalog. In contrast, request fulfillment is a primary process of the service operations stage. Clearly, this stage supports the daily operation and coordination of activities, tasks, and processes required to deliver and support the operations by executing such fundamental processes as incident, problem, and event management. Next slide, please. Enterprises that use price or chargebacks or showbacks can influence the demand for each service. It's an economic principle and can be used to direct business customers to such things as a particular mobile phone type, operating system, and so on. Requests, on the other hand, are generally not influenced or governed by price or cost. The business customer needs whatever the request fulfills. In fact, suggesting a cost relationship between a particular request that is owned by IT will surely contribute to many grumblings within the organization. At the end of the day, IT's business customer will choose a deployment model that exhibits cost transparency. Cost transparency is a term used to identify costs associated with delivering and maintaining the IT service. In today's marketplace, in which the line of business can choose vendors outside the traditional internal IT department, it is critical that services in the catalog are defined in terms of cost transparency. Requests are part of the operational overhead. Business customers presume that any request is part of daily operations and do not have an appetite for cost transparency when it comes to requests. Next slide, please. Services defined in the catalog are considered configuration items, while requests are not. Defining services as CIs allow organizations to reuse and aggregate configuration items to other services and results in such things as service control, efficiency, and indeed improved quality. One client of Evergreen claimed to have defined over 1,000 services. After defining the components of each service to the configuration management system, the client discovered that 30% of the services that they were illustrating in their service catalog were actually redundant services. When services and their constituent components are defined as CIs, or configuration items, control is achieved as they are brought under management rigor of the Change Advisory Board. Requests are not defined as CIs and subsequently not controlled by change management. Next slide, please. So let's conclude my portion of today's webinar by identifying 6 key takeaways. First of all, service catalogs and request portals are not the same. We've talked about that in many different viewpoints today. However, clarity of terms is critical to an organization. Clearly defining the differences between a service and a request eliminates any confusion on the part of end users and business customers. These individuals will use the IT capabilities as long as they understand their purpose and function. However, lack of clarity will result in misuse or even non-use. Number two, service catalogs begin with the customer. Services in the catalog should be built after determining what the customer needs to be productive. Historically, IT's total focus was on complex technology outcomes, not what was best for the business customer. Even today, IT's notion that automating server provisioning or software patching is a so-called service simply packages what IT already does rather than understanding and delivering the service from the customer's viewpoint. Number three, service catalogs link IT strategies with consumers and customers. A powerful alignment to the strategy of the enterprise exists when IT organizations use the service portfolio to define services and empower their customers. Defining components within the service portfolio establishes the strategic intent of the IT organization by identifying which IT assets, for example, resources and capabilities, need to be allocated to improve the performance potential of the business. Number four, rich attributes and costing drive self-service. Offering well-defined service offerings with options and packages that customers want creates an end user that is largely self-sufficient and productive. Such an approach benefits IT as much as the customer. Improvements to service offerings standardizes IT delivery and absolutely provides a fast track to continual service improvement. Number five, service catalogs are a powerful transformation lever. With culture, processes, skills, technology, and leadership still deeply rooted in a 30-year-old client-server paradigm, IT faces a titanic struggle to transform itself to meet the needs of the modern customer. By looking at everything that IT does as part of a service and focusing intently on dramatically transforming the internal customer experience, IT can learn how to be responsive to a customer's true needs and learn how to lead the customer. Finally, service components as configuration items create reusable building blocks. Services defined as CIs provide IT organizations with a modular approach to developing services. Components can be reused and merged with other components to build more critical services. To take us the rest of the way, please welcome Jeff Benedict. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Share my screen. All right, so the part I want to kind of start off from where Phil left off is, one of the vehicles that we can use in terms of presenting this service catalog and kind of having a customer-centric view is we can use tools like ServiceNow to create these service portfolio portals and customer experience portals and really kind of shape a new front door to IT. So one thing I wanted to bring up before I showed what we've kind of created in ServiceNow is really when we approach these customer portals and the customer experience and presenting our services, there's really four kind of key design principles that we want to make sure are delivered to. One, it must be beautiful, and this may mean something different to different users, but we must understand what beautiful is in the eye of our customers and use that as a measuring stick to ensure that what we create is something that they perceive as beautiful and want to use on a regular basis. it must be simple. So we want to make sure we reduce clutter. We want to kind of keep the clicks down to minimal. We want to, also just not overwhelm our customers. We want them to view this as an approachable solution and be able to use this, with minimal to little education and training. We also want to make it complete. So if, we wanted something that has purpose for their daily life and purpose for their regular working life, so that they come to the portal on a regular basis and use the data, the information, the things to order and request, as well as the information around services, so that they can fulfill and do their jobs. Otherwise, if they don't come there regularly, then they'll forget about it and they'll revert back to other means by which to try to solve and answer their problems. I think the other thing, the last principle leading, is really hitting on running IT more like a business and marketing and prescribing the solutions to our actual customers. And so this usually necessitates getting to understand and know who your customers are and their needs, and being able to prescribe and suggest things that are relevant to their job functions and their business needs. One thing I want to highlight here, so just to give you an example, this is an example of a real kind of request form from a customer of ours. And I use this as an example to highlight, just if you go through the list of questions, and this is a request form to ask for kind of a training event. And if you notice, there's a lot of information to be filled in. So I always ask people to think about these forms, to think about the interface and the customer experience as if you were the customer. And, from my perspective, if I were on the other end of this, trying to fill this form out, my first reaction would be that this would not be perceived as simple, and it would be likely something that I would, abort and look for alternative ways to request my training, whether that be through phone calls or through an email or contact a friend that can help me out to fulfill this process versus using the actual tools in front of us. So let's take a look at an example self-service portal that we've created to kind of hit on some of those design principles that I mentioned earlier. One of the first things you'll notice with this particular portal is an element of kind of marketing or suggesting information to our consumer or our customers through this use of these headlines. And one thing to know with these is these are interactive and dynamic in the sense that the actual data is sourced from from records created inside of ServiceNow. So as we add a new service or as we add new training videos, et cetera, they're adjusting based off of that. The other element that I like to mention with this is that this is persona driven, in that as I interact with the portal, I'm categorized as a certain persona, which can be a salesperson, an HR person, or someone with a specific job function. And then the information can be tailored or adjusted based off of who I am. And so you see that in this case in headlines. You'll see it in the case of services. You'll also see it in the case of items that are suggested to me in the shopping cart and experience. Another thing I like to mention with this portal is just kind of the design element that went into it. We are trying to maximize the real estate as much as possible and kind of keep the clutter down. So a lot of the actual menu navigations are considered off canvas. My options to be able to chat are kind of open and expand, same for things like search, as well as my kind of user information or user-related data is kind of expand and collapse. We believe IT needs to think a little differently about some of the services they provide to their customers. More and more customers are willing to solve their own problems, and when they need help, they expect it in a more personalized manner. So one of the things that we have baked into this particular example is something that models kind of the Apple Genius Bar, and goes beyond just IT groups, but other segments of the organization where people are making themselves available for that one-on-one consultation, right? And so during certain service hours, I can either chat with a specific expert in an area, or even off business hours or during business hours, I can also schedule an appointment for that one-on-one consultation, which is going to take into account their scheduled windows of when they're available for these appointments and existing appointments that are already been made for those particular groups. But the end result is that we're kind of providing that more high-touch service to our individual customers for the areas where they need specific help and where they need specific additional attention. Much of the power of any IT kind of portal comes from the shopping cart, where the customer can request the goods and services from IT. And this should be in a customer-centric manner. One of the things that you see here is these actual featured items are based off of who I am and my persona in terms of promoting certain items that are relevant to me and my job function. As I shop, I can certainly, for the suggested items, I can browse by category, or I can always go and leverage a search to find what I'm looking for, right? Or I can look at my things that I commonly order or recently view as ways to order my items. Another principle we like to stress whenever we're designing these solutions is making sure you set the proper expectations with your customers. And that can take the shape, in terms of these actual order items here, in terms of whether there's any cost associated with what I'm ordering, kind of when can I expect this item to be delivered, or when can I expect this service to be delivered, as well as what am I actually getting as a result to this particular request. So you want to make sure that you have those principles in play when you think about the customer and the customer's needs. That if they have to provide any inputs, whether that be financial or whether that be information to satisfy the request, then that should be clear. Also, when they can get it, they should be clear as to when they should expect it, as well as are they actually, what exactly are they actually getting when they order this particular thing. Another principle I like to bring up is that using collaboration tools such as the live feed or Yammer or Jive or some of the other tools that are out there can be helpful engines for helping your customer through the service experience, and it's especially relevant when you take more and more services like BYOD or other kind of broker-based services, where your IT's role may be more of a service broker than that of a service provider. So things like the live feed or those collaboration forums or message boards can be very helpful for a customer in terms of sharing experiences, sharing answers amongst their peers to try to get the help they need to actually leverage and use a particular service that they need in order to be successful at their job. We think of these portals to be more than a method to just kind of capture that demand, but also a way to empower and help customers find answers. One of the tricky parts with this is more and more of the actual information that our customers need in order to be successful in solving their own problems may come outside of our own knowledge bases and repositories. They may come from community forums, they may come from YouTube, they may come from the internet, or they may come from vendor-specific support sites. So one of the things that we're kind of highlighting here is that the information can be unified, and search can be unified, and the information returned can also go beyond just the data segments of ServiceNow, but can also go reach out of ServiceNow into things like YouTube to show things like videos that may be helpful to the search site. And again, this is another case where knowing your customer and their role can come into play for, if I'm a salesperson, maybe I want to reach out into Salesforce.com's community forums for information, or maybe I want to reach into Workday for information if I'm an HR person, and so forth. So I would look at this as an opportunity to say what information does somebody need in order to be successful, and leverage things like ServiceNow's search capabilities to reach out into those segments and pull that data back for your customers. Let me go to something else here. One principle, just to kind of as an example to align on that principle of complete. One of the things we're doing in this particular portal is we're leveraging kind of single sign-on, so that as I log into this portal, I'm also getting access to the various applications that I use. And this becomes yet another feature in itself that may be minor, but becomes an element of stickiness to where the individuals can go into our customer portal, get information and answers, request service, but also can jump out and launch the applications they use on a regular basis. home. So in terms of service taxonomy and the list of services, and this is certainly something we talk about when we talk about service catalog, that it's not just the the customer's experience, but also the definition of here are the services that we provide to our customer. So as you can see on this page, I've got kind of a category or a hierarchy of the various service and service areas. And each of these services is going to provide me some information about both how do I get support, but also what is the service and what are the different offerings and commitments being made for it. So if I look at something like laptop support, you can see that I have multiple different offerings, one related to executive laptop, one versus standard laptop. And some of the commitments that are made, some are going to be attributes in terms of you get this particular level of service, and some are actually going to be measurables in the sense of my response time targets, and could also be availability targets. So some of the things that you'll see here is that we're providing information about how they can, how they get support, how they would engage in this program. We're also providing abilities for people to provide kind of reviews and ratings of the service, which can be helpful to a service owner in terms of continual service improvement, but also can be helpful to other service consumers of sharing experiences and issues and so forth. As you can see, I've also got some tracking of those measurables in terms of performance-related attributes. Let me highlight another service here. If I go into bond trading as an example, our services, as Phil indicated, are configuration items and can be made up of relationships to other services and or other configuration items. So here's a case here where we have multiple different offerings and commitments, some that are response-driven commitments, but also some that are availability commitments. And if I look at our service map, this particular service is made up of a number of different configuration items, web servers, database servers, network gear, et cetera, that if any of the health of those components is to suffer, then the overall service is going to suffer as well. And that's represented on this page in terms of the service status of the critical components that make up that service, as well as any of the actual availability and response time targets are going to take into account not just the uptime and responsiveness of issues directly related to that service, but also issues and availability of components that the service depends on. Let's go back to home. So the one thing to know with this is this whole thing is built on ServiceNow. So behind the scenes, all these service definition records are records in ServiceNow. These are service records that have related business or service offering records, which any of these service offering records also can have any number of commitments. And so it's all, in essence, data to be managed from a service owner perspective and obviously then presented in an intuitive manner on the portal. A couple more points I want to bring up. One other kind of principle we like to hit on whenever we build these portals is also understand that you can give your customers and people the ability to personalize their experience and personalize their needs. So there's a couple little elements here that we have in this one in terms of the ability of the user to kind of save their own favorites, kind of personalize their search settings. And the favorites, in essence, become bookmarks and shortcuts to various records that I use on a regular basis. And these can be things that I commonly order, or they can be helpful knowledge articles or groups that I engage with on a regular basis. And so I can quickly jump to those, as well as quickly jump to my applications that I use more regularly than not. From that same kind of My Stuff page, the user can also see their requests as well as their items to be approved. And one of the things that we certainly recommend in this case is try to keep those clicks down. And so some of the things you see here is providing kind of a quick view status of the particular tickets that are being worked on my behalf. So if there were new recent updates or a status change, I would quickly see those in my kind of as I hover over the items. Same thing when it comes to items that are awaiting my approval. I can quickly see information about those items, but I can also from the list do an approve and deny just to kind of reduce the number of clicks overall that I need to perform in order to do my job and do it effectively. So that's kind of what I wanted to show today. I appreciate the time, and I hope this was helpful in terms of sparking some ideas and thoughts about kind of the customer experience and presenting different service catalog components in a single portal.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yes, this is Don. I'll take over. Thank you. Jeff, great job. Thank you very much. So, possible next steps. If you found this interesting and wonder what might be a logical next step, here are a few options we offer. Perhaps you're considering a broader service catalog initiative, but you aren't sure where to start and how to get your team on the same page. Because of that, we created a one-day private service catalog workshop, which we hold on site, and it educates your team, uncovers key business drivers, and creates a logical roadmap for going forward. You can literally save months of effort in consensus building and get your program moving faster. Best of all, it's only $3,950, which isn't much more than covering the cost of travel. If you're interested in the advanced service catalog solution and what Jeff demoed today, perhaps you'd like a deeper dive demo for you and your team to see if it might be a good fit for you. Last, many looking to improve their customer experience today began with re-engineering the look and functionality of their ServiceNow content management system. Evergreen offers some beautiful options that are much more than just skin-deep rebranding. At the end of the webinar, there will be a form you can use to tell us if you'd like us to contact you about any further interest you may have. So I think that's it for today, and we now go to opening it up for questions that have come in. Have you got any questions in the queue, Steph?
I do. So I'm going to start with some questions for Jeff. Jeff, in your demo, you mentioned you mentioned Yammer and Jive. Can you also tie into SharePoint as well?
The answer would be yes. It's certainly something we've looked at a number of times in terms of integrating to SharePoint, both from a knowledge source perspective, but it's also very common that people want to use SharePoint as another vehicle as maybe the place to start. So we've seen in some places where people may want to embed ServiceNow content into SharePoint, and a lot of times you can do that with web parts and kind of embedded content. So there's that use case. There's also the use case of reaching into SharePoint to get document information, and we've seen that as a common request that we've kind of worked on a couple of times.
Okay, great. And I'm going to stick with a few more questions there for you before I move over to Phil. Jeff, is CMS available with the base subscription, and has ServiceNow always had CMS?
So the answer is yes and yes. At least, obviously, if you went back far versions, probably before the Aspen release, I'm not sure exactly when CMS first got introduced, but it's been around for a while. And there is an out-of-the-box CMS that you can certainly leverage and is usable, though we tend to find most of the value comes from creating, a more personalized experience for your customers. And it is part of the platform. Certainly, if you were to, want to include things like project data or demand data, or you wanted to orchestrate activities that would connect into your data center, then you may need licenses for some of those other applications that would be presented in the CMS. But leveraging CMS as it is part of the foundation and part of the base license.
Okay, great. I think this is a follow-up question for the Yammer question. Jeff, is there an integration with the Yammer for the live feed?
So there's not a package integration with Yammer. We as ourselves are a Yammer user. We have established and created integrations to Yammer for our own purposes to reach in and grab Yammer messages and duplicate them into the live feed messages and both vice versa. So there's certainly capabilities there. Yammer does have a fairly open web services API that can be leveraged to support that. Though there's not, to my knowledge, there's not a packaged plugin out there, but there is certainly some code around integrating with Yammer that can be leveraged to create sharing of information between those two collaboration tools.
Okay, Jeff, another question. Can you integrate with LANDesk products, LAN, LANDesk?
Yes. So LANDesk, I assume from a configuration management perspective and getting your laptops, desktops, or servers managed from Landesk into ServiceNow, that would be a yes. There is a plugin specific for Landesk that basically connects to the Landesk database for duplicating, replicating the configuration item data from Landesk into ServiceNow's configuration management application.
Okay, Jeff and Lori's asking, did you show how a request can be submitted through the service catalog service description, or are they kept separate?
So they can be kept separate. I'll highlight real quickly here for those. Let's see which one has an example here. Maybe like SAP Financial Accounting. So you can have a service definition, in this case it's SAP Financial Accounting, but you can also have contextually relevant request items in relation to this service. So in this case, SAP Financial Accounting is the service and one of the offerings and commitments made as part of SAP Financial Accounting, but also I can request, say, an accounting report, which then takes me into my request, my kind of request engine to add to cart, order now, this particular component. So there's a relationship between, you know, say requesting, I guess the request portal portions of it and the services, but they are two different definitions in terms of a service and what you're actually providing versus the actual actionable requests they may go to somebody to respond to.
Okay, great. Andy's asking for you, Jeff, how do you differentiate my services from global information services? Are my services a subset of the global ones?
Yes. So the answer is yes. So this is the full categorization of services as the global information services. The my services are those services that I am a subscriber to, which is either subscribed from a department perspective of my department relies on and uses this service, or the service is considered a global service that all individuals make use of, or me as an individual, I am listed as a subscriber for them. But so these services are, you know, part of the global information services.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. I've got some questions for Phil and Don. Before I jump over to those, I do just want to let everyone know that we will be sending out a link to access both the recording and to download the slides. I expect to have that out by midday tomorrow. Moving on to a question for Phil. Phil, if you could take away one lesson from all of this, what would it be? So just kind of based on, you know, what you're seeing out there, what would be the one lesson?
Sure. I think it's extremely important to get buy-in and understanding from the customer and want to know how they're using the environment, what they want to improve their productivity, and stop thinking about how IT can, you know, make their life better by using all the technology that we have. It's very important to, you know, cast your net as wide as possible to bring the end user, the business customer into the fold and really explore their needs and wants with regard to services in the service catalog.
Okay, great. And Phil, this question is probably for you as well. What degree of maturity do you see with the service catalogs in your consulting work? And part two, why do you think the confusion exists between service catalogs and request portals?
In the maturity, well, we don't see in the workshops that we've done some surveys, and I think the maturity is getting better. Many forward-looking companies have been doing service catalogs for a long time, but it's only been in the recent past with the advent of cloud services and the pressure, if you will, of internal IT organizations to come up with the services that they're actually doing or that they actually have available to their business customers. There's many vendors out there that lines of businesses are asking or having relationships. The line of businesses are having relationships with external vendors because their internal IT organizations haven't been, you know, delivering those services. So as a result of that, the maturity is getting better, and it's very important for us to understand that there are some roadblocks to that too for IT organizations. You know, a lot of organizations have no funding, or there's organizational change resistance, which is typical in larger organizations. And then something we can help with, that is we being Evergreen, there's just plain lack of knowledge on how to get the job done. So those are things that all contribute to lack of maturity in the market today. And could you repeat the second question?
The second question was, why do you think the confusion exists between Service Catalog and request portals?
Well, I think it's because the CIO has heard the business customer complain that they want to get things done, and they call IT and then send an email, and they don't know who to contact. So IT, in its wisdom, said, okay, hey, we'll just create this thing. We'll call it a service catalog. Only what it will be composed of is a bunch of things that we currently do today, that we, being IT, currently does today. We'll call it a service portal. It'll get there. You know, the business user will see that, but it doesn't empower the end user, nor does it align itself with the business strategy. And that's really what we want to have with the service catalog. We really want to align that, ask the business, what's your strategy? What's your goal? You want to you know, increase business, so how can IT help you do that? And IT really needs to become an IT system broker and integrator, and they can do that by creating services, putting them out to the service catalog, and having users use them for their improved productivity. As Jeff was showing today, that elegance, that empowerment for doing a variety of things, not just requesting one thing, I need access to something, but, you know, having interfaces, you know, having help desks available via the web to ask questions and that kind of thing, very important.
Okay, great. Don, I think this question's for you. It's from Jason, and he asked, does the beautiful user-centric look and feel need to come out at the same time as the service catalog? Delaying the service catalog launch for cosmetic purposes doesn't seem like the best idea.
That's a good question. It's not terribly difficult to create a more beautiful look and feel. You know, to create the facade of improvement. And it's not terribly difficult to reorganize services or things that we want to call services to be more easily understood and accessed. The challenge becomes then that we have to then deliver that service in a way that's consistent with the expectation we set. So the sort of the process we follow with clients is when they want to become customer-centric and, you know, service-centric, is we start by re-engineering the look and feel, but maintaining very careful expectations about the delivery. If it takes 2 weeks to do something, set the SLA at 3 weeks. And so when someone comes into the portal and they order a service, they can make a decision as a consumer right at that point that meets their expectation. Then we deliver the service in that time frame and everything's fine. The nice thing about that kind of an approach is that over time, at the pace the organization can sustain, you can re-engineer service delivery and automate effectively behind the doors and simplify. And so that service, which may have taken 3 weeks to deliver or 2 weeks to deliver, at one point, all of a sudden is now available in 1 hour, right? And it just changes, in effect, I'm going to say magically, but it changes in a very nice way. And the user goes, oh, that's great. Now I can get this a lot faster. So it's all about maintaining, setting correct expectation and then meeting it and then improving over time at a pace you can stand.
Okay. Don, another question I think geared to you. What kinds of things happen when companies implement broad release management initiatives?
Well, yeah, I think there's been a lot of conversation today about the difference between, well, it's actually probably a broad request management, not release management, I would guess. That's a different topic. But if we look at it from a request management standpoint, all these points that Phil made about the difference between that and service catalog, maybe the biggest problem is it becomes like the Wild West. And you can have hundreds or thousands of services that are created, and they're all created in different fashions. They're not created consistently. There's no service taxonomy applied to definition and maintenance of the service, right? So you start to have, because you start to have all these services out there. Well, from a user's consumptive standpoint, that's exactly the wrong way. You know, we're not designing from the customer in, we're designing from IT out at that point. And that tends to be what request portals are. It's just a way, like Phil said, to externalize what IT is delivering already. It doesn't help the customer, though. It doesn't make it easier for them. It makes it harder, right? And if you look at that form to request training that Jeff showed, that's a horrible form. It has everything that's needed from the fulfiller standpoint, but it has very little that's wanted from the consumer standpoint. And that's the problem with just broad, wide-scale request catalogs. You have to think very carefully about what services are offered and how they're delivered and what that service experience is. And that's where you start.
Okay, I've got one last question. So last call for anyone out there if you'd like to enter anything in the Q&A panel. The last question I have queued up is, how does having services in the CMDB as configuration items help?
Well, Phil, I can take that, or you can take that.
Go ahead, Don.
Okay. So it actually is it's sort of a follow-on to the question we just talked about with the request portal. And you think about, why do we care about putting a service in the CMDB or in configuration management? And the big question is, what's the value of configuration management? And anything we put in configuration management as an item, we can then track it, right? We can monitor its use. We can look at its quality, consistency. We can take feedback on that. It becomes something that's an artifact that we can manage. And so if we do that and we put them in there consistently from a design process, we now have building blocks. And we have service building blocks in configuration management that can be reused. Because the idea over time is to start with simple blocks and then combine those blocks to create different services. Now, those services may change over time, but then it prevents you from having to make every service a custom creation. It's not a sustainable approach. Right? And that's also what creates services that are almost exactly the same, but are completely stick-built from the ground up. So the CMDB and putting services in it gives you a dictionary, in effect, right, where you can have your reusable components and you contain them and maintain them effectively so that you know you can rely upon them. And for example, let's say we've got a service in there as a CI, and its SLA is we deliver it in 4 hours, okay? And we find by looking at it that it's done that way 99% of the time. So we can look at it. We can say, wow, that's something we need for this bigger service we want to build, and that looks like a pretty reliable component. We're going to use it, right? And that's why all the attributes of that CI over time are very, very valuable to building more extensible services, but also building more reliable services.
Okay, well, I'm looking, I don't see any more questions, so going to take this time to once again remind you, you will receive a survey that will pop up in the window when you exit the webinar. We do ask that you take a moment to fill that out. It's great feedback for us. Thank you for attending. We do have a number of webinars coming up, with our next one on October 8th, and I will be sending these slides, access link to the slides and the webinar recording, and also some information on the additional webinars this month to you by noontime tomorrow. So thanks again for your participation. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.